Well, here I am in Rome, and this is Jim's Jaunts number 2. Happy to be here. It's a rainy, cold, rainy day, and this morning I'm going to go over to the Coliseum and tour it. So stay with me here as we go into the Coliseum. Now, this first picture, I'm showing you the archway. There are 80 arches into the Coliseum. And of the 80 arches, they're all the same size, and they're called the vomit arches. And the reason they're called vomit arches is because when 50,000 people flood into the Coliseum to watch an event, it looks like vomit from inside the Coliseum as the people rush through. So there'll be 50,000 spectators for the various shows and performances that they had in the Coliseum. This is the view as you walk up through the vomit arch and you see the actual ground floor. Now, the government officials, the emperor and the government senators and government officials would be on the ground level. But there was a floor that was put here, and there are 2 decks below the floor. And what you can see here is just the opening. The floor was removed. Parts were used for building materials for the rest of Rome. But this is the first look when you walk into the Coliseum. But when the floor was covered with sand, and the reason was he had many events where blood was shed, and it was easy to remove the bloody sand and replace it. So it was quite a deadly place during the 300 years that and it was actually called an amphitheater, not a coliseum, that it was used. The Coliseum was 4 stories, 50 meters tall. The ground floor was reserved, as I mentioned, for the emperor, government officials, and noblemen. No women were allowed on the first 2 floors. Then just normal men had the 3rd floor, and then women and some slaves had the 4th floor. But thinking about 50,000 people, and some events went on for like 30 days. So 50,000 people there for 30 days, and you'd be there for the execution of Christians or Jews. If there was a thief, it would be a public execution. In the 130-day period, over 9,000 people were murdered in the Coliseum. The Coliseum, as it was seen in the early 50s, is this photograph. And it was not in such disarray. Now, I visited here the first time in 1961, and it looked fairly similar to what the photograph is. However, I revisited in 1980, well, not 80, 85, and I was surprised at how the fumes from the vehicles and other acid rain had started to really show its deterioration to the Coliseum. Then I came back in 2000, and again there was nothing that was being done to restore or to protect the Coliseum. It was just in a bigger state of disrepair. I was there in 2013, and for the first time I saw some scaffolding, but not a lot. But then I'm here now, and as you'll see, there's scaffolding everywhere. They are trying to prevent any further degradation, and they're trying to not necessarily restore it, but to keep it from falling down. Now, this is how the Coliseum looked for over 300 years, and it was used basically as a theater. There were executions, the gladiators fought here, the Christians and Jews were slaughtered, and then they actually had animal hunts. They would turn lions, tigers, elephants loose on the Coliseum floor. The other thing that they did was they could take the floor up, which was a wood floor, and the actual Coliseum was built on an artificial man-made lake that was built for the Emperor Nero, the crazy Nero. And so there was water underneath, and they could actually have sea battles as a performance inside the Coliseum. I thought that was kind of unusual and interesting. Now this shows how they were restoring part of the floor with a concrete floor instead of wood. But you can imagine how it would be if they had the wood floor, concrete all the way across the two lower levels. The two lower levels being used, one for the storage of the wild animals and the horses and donkeys and so forth. And then also there was the floor for the gladiators and the prisoners and the Christians. In this video, you'll see that on the left-hand side there's some marble. And when you think about the Coliseum, the entire Coliseum was covered with marble. Now, through the centuries, the different popes, as they became more powerful than the emperor, started to dismantle the Coliseum and take the marble from the Coliseum, and they built St. Peter's Basilica and St. Paul's and other things around town. So the surface, the facade of the Coliseum has been removed for building materials in other locations around Rome. Here I'm standing at the entrance of the old Roman Forum. Now, the Roman Forum is really amazing because when you think about the time frame of these ruins, you're talking Julius Caesar, you're talking Mark Antony and Cleopatra, and they walked down these streets, and this was a marketplace. You'll notice that there's a column in the middle of the photo and then one to the left, and one of those is the Senate, which the steps of which Caesar was murdered, and then the other is either the treasury or the library, and I can't remember which. Now, here's a picture of one of the 7 arches that are around Rome, and they're almost identical in scale to the Arc de Triomphe in Paris. But they were built here first, and there are 4 that offer entry into the Roman Forum. So you can imagine Julius Caesar bringing his legion into the downtown part of Rome, and no general had ever brought his legion inside the gates of Rome. That was the reason he was assassinated. Was they're afraid that he was too powerful and were going to become a dictator, which the emperors were anyway, so I guess it didn't really matter. Anyway, that takes care of us and the area around the Coliseum and the Roman Forum. After walking up through the courtyard and getting the picture of St. Peter's Dome, I went inside the Vatican Museum, and it is a stunning piece. And by the way, it's new. They had the Vatican Treasury before, and they had all of these works of art, but they now have a building which shows some magnificent historical, archaeological type things, and they're just absolutely magnificent. And it's a beautiful, beautiful building with this incredible, endless number of treasures. Now you come around the corner, and here's a statue that is similar to Michelangelo's The David. It's much smaller than The David, but still it's the same idea. And if you hadn't seen The David, you might think this was the actual one, but it's not. Now this ceiling is not the Sistine Chapel. You're not allowed to take photos inside the Sistine Chapel. The day I was there, it was not busy, believe it or not. I even found a seat on the side where the cardinals sit when they're debating who the next pope is going to be. So I got to stand there for about 15-20 minutes just admiring all of the ceiling and all of the work that Michelangelo did. It's just a fabulous experience, but they don't allow you to talk. They don't allow you to take pictures. It's a solemn place in the Roman Catholic Church, and so you have to be very reverent when you're in there. Now, out the window of the Vatican Museum, you see the Pope's residence. Now, Pope Francis thought that the Pope's quarters were too palatial for him, and therefore he selected a small apartment that is down the way from the Pope's actual residence. And the people admired that in the new Pope Francis. He's a very common man. He's even seen at night walking around without protection, and he even will stop and give directions if tourists look confused as to where they are. Now, after the museum, we went over to St. Peter's Basilica, and I'm standing below the balcony where the Pope gives his addresses and looking out over St. Peter's Square, where tens of thousands of people gather to hear his message. It's quite a feeling when you're standing there and you see how big it is, and you imagine what it must look like with 10,000 people standing in there cheering for the Pope. Inside St. Peter's is the Madonna and Child, and is protected by a glass cage. The Pieta is some fanatic took a sledgehammer to it, so it's protected, but they restored it perfectly. And it is just such a magnificent masterpiece by Michelangelo of the Madonna and Child. It's just, you can stand there and just look at it and almost weep. It is so beautiful. And then after that, here's the high vaulted church altar. And this is a huge piece. The church is 600 feet long, and it's just absolutely massive. But underneath this altar are the remains of St. Peter, and this is where he's actually buried. Now, it was a rainy day and so forth, but it cleared up a little bit, and I took a cab back to the hotel. Thank you so much for watching this video. The next stop will be Naples, and it's another day, another exciting point as we journey from here to Singapore. And again, I hope you enjoy the video as much as I enjoy making it. Thanks for watching.